The war in Ukraine has changed the world. And now we need to think about where this world is moving to, together. That's why MIM Business School is launching the nationwide educational project Reinforce UA, where the world's greatest minds will share their ideas and insights. And you will get their experience, change your perspective, and discover what changes should the business be ready for, before and after the victory. Every week on reinforceua.com.
Добрий вечір. Мене звуть Вячеслав Покатило від імені бізнес-школи МІМ. Я вітаю вас на проєкті Reinforce UA. Цей проєкт англомовний, тож всіх учасників, хто приєднався до нас вперше і потребує перекладу, прошу натиснути кнопочку Interpretation внизу вашого екрану. Hello everybody, hello friends and colleagues both in Ukraine and worldwide. I'm Vyacheslav Pokatilo, and on behalf of the MIM Kyiv Business School, welcome you on Reinforce UA project. This project was designed in order to widen the narrative, the present narrative in Ukraine, and to bring well-known intellectual to discuss those issues which are currently in minds worldwide, not only in Ukraine. And the project was made possible due to the generous support of Bogdan Gavrilishin, the Family Foundation, 50 Thinkers Organization, and three major associations of management education, ASCSB, AMBA, and EFMD. We're grateful for all donations you have made when registering to the project, and remind that all money we collected will be directed to support temporarily displaced Ukrainian women who would like to start their own businesses. I'd like to remind you that this project this session will be recorded and will be available on YouTube and in other, let's say, platforms as record, but currently is online. And all participants will be able at the end to ask a few questions. For this purpose, I kindly ask you to use Q&A button and not chart. We will not follow the chart. And now I have the honor to represent our speakers today. As a matter of fact, our first speaker doesn't need special presentation probably because I believe Johnson & Son, Distinguished Professor in International Marketing Emeritus at the Kellogg School of Management, Northwestern University, Professor Philip Kotler, doesn't need the presentation and is known probably by all MBA graduates over the last dozens of years due to his famous books. He is the more than famous, and if he's think of marketing, immediately the name of Professor Kotler appear, and we are very honored to have Professor Kotler today with us. And his colleagues, Christian Sarkar is the author, entrepreneur, consultant, activist, publisher, with a very wide range of activities, starting from areas of art to double loop marketing, from technology entrepreneurship to activism in $300 house project. Professor Kotler and Christian Sarkar collaborated to develop Sarkar-Kotler framework for brand activism, and they co-authored the recent books published in 2018, which is called Brand Activity Papers to Action. And also in 2019, Christian Sarkar and Philip Kotler began work on an open innovation design challenge I'm excited because we want to save the humanity from itself, which evolved in the Wicked 7 project. And as a matter of fact, it will be a subject matter of discussion today. With this, I kindly introduce, give the floor to our guest, and we are looking forward to your presentation.
Yes, this is Philip Kotler, and thank you for inviting my colleague and myself to share our thoughts about your situation in the Ukraine. I am actually close to the Ukraine because my father and my mother were both born in Ukraine. For details, my father was born in 1905 in Nizhyn, Nizhyn, and my mother was born in 1910, years later, and Berdichev. So I've also visited Ukraine and spoke there maybe 4 to 6 times in the past, and every time coming to Kiev and other parts, it was a wonderful experience. I often visit other countries like Italy, India, etc., but it was always so pleasant to be at that time in Ukraine. Now, I know you want to know some things about business changes that you're going to have to make under the circumstances. Most people read my book, Marketing Management, which just came out as the 16th edition, and it has everything about marketing. But if you want a broader view, I'm going to show you a book that I wrote in 2010. And the reason for that is it's called Chaotix. And in fact, the subtitle of it is The Business of Managing and Marketing in the Age of Turbulence, which you certainly are experiencing. And therefore, that was an attempt during the financial crisis of 2010 to help companies figure out, do you cut your advertising when things are tough? Do you cut your new product development when things are tough? And there's many questions that come up in adjusting your business so that it's still very lively and responsive to the changes. But aside from the work we did with Chaotix, we want to work with you particularly on how to think ahead for the Ukraine to be prepared for regenerating the society. And my good colleague, Christian Sarkar, has prepared some slides based really on the work being done by us, and particularly by him in Palermo. Palermo is not facing your situation, but in a sense, it was a country, Sicily, where if things weren't done, all the monuments, all the beauty of the country was going to deteriorate because there wasn't the money to keep the society active. But that work led us to develop the whole approach to regeneration. So I'm going to turn this over to Christian to lead you through some ideas. Christian, your turn.
Thanks, Bill. You know, we have more questions than answers. So I would say that really this presentation is really going to be more putting out some ideas and hopefully receiving or helping you start thinking about what those answers might be. So for example, and I'll just start with one question here, which is, you know, in business school, we're taught about value creation, but it's business value creation. Nowhere are we taught about community value creation. And this, in fact, was our starting point for our regeneration project that we're doing in Italy, in Sicily. But what I want to do is give you a quick background as to how we have reached this point. You know, in 2018, Phil and I decided that the big multinationals need to do something beyond just, you know, trying to do ESG or just trying to do CSR. They've got to actually take stands on some of the world's most important issues to make a difference. Then in 2020, we said, well, how do we map out these problems, the world's biggest problems? Because we found out that they're all sort of interrelated. And today we'll go deeper into one of those wicked problems, which is namely the hate and conflict, i.e. war. And then in 2022, we're involved in this project on the ground in terms of how do you bring a community up when it doesn't have funds from outside, when it doesn't have, you know, investment coming in. How do you actually bring the community together to build regenerative strategies, not just for business, but to build community value? And that's the work we're doing through the Regenerative Marketing Institute. So here's where you guys are. You know, everybody's already talking about how Ukraine needs to be rebuilt and what needs to happen and the Marshall Plan for Ukraine. And all of this is very nice to talk about. But for you, the question really comes down to who decides, who is going to make these decisions, and when can we get started? And this is where the wicked problem thing comes in, which is when we look at these wicked problems and try to analyze them. And in this case, we're going to look at specifically the problem of war and how does war happen? What causes this kind of, what mindset drives us to war? And if you take a step back, we realize that, what we believe influences how we interpret reality. And so how we look at the world depends in large part to what we have inside our heads and how we've been taught to view the world. This is actually very dangerous. And here's one reason why. This is sort of a map of some of the influences on the cultural narrative, the influence on Vladimir Putin, and why he's having such a hard time dealing with a Ukraine that wants to be independent. And when you start looking at challenges, going back to the roots of the causes of these problems, very often you find that hate and violence is often motivated by some kind of ideology that goes back to and can be escalated and can be deliberately escalated. And this, for example, is the pyramid of hate, which is basically a series of escalation actions that escalate into violence. And how do you start off with, for example, I've mapped it out. You start off with ridicule and making fun of people and stereotyping and bullying, and how those individual acts of violence and hate become institutional acts of hate and violence. And this is sort of a map for how we got to this point in history. And by the way, this applies to almost every sort of conflict, not just the one in Ukraine. But the wickedest problem out of all these 7 wicked problems that we have, the wickedest is problem number 8, which is we don't know how to collaborate. We don't learn how to collaborate. We don't teach collaboration in business school. In fact, one of the biggest problems going forward is even as the world needs people to come together and countries to come together to solve problems, what are we doing? We're polarizing ourselves, becoming more and more nationalistic, becoming more and more polarized. And that's a recipe for destruction, not a recipe for finding solutions. So is it possible to actually teach collaboration and escalate peace and justice and inclusion and acts of goodwill? Now, in the middle of a war, a chart like this looks like a naive, dream. And what I would say is this is maybe not so naive. If we take out the word love and peace and add the word collaboration in its place, then you have an understanding of how institutions, nonprofits, individuals, governments can work together to create a better future, not just for Ukraine, but for the world itself. And so this, to me, is the leader's job. And this is something that Phil and I have talked about in our Wicked 7 project, which is what is the job of the leader for the future? It has to do with reimagining and recreating, revisioning the future. And probably the most important thing your leaders can do is create this new narrative and help you buy into this narrative. And of course, it must be unpolitical. It has to be depoliticized. It has to be something that's based on, the outcomes that we want, not based on ideology. And with that in mind, we come to this message that we have in terms of regeneration, which is we have to move as a world from an extractive viewpoint where government is military-based to deep democracy. This is actually the exact opposite of what we see happening in the world today. We actually need this And yet our governments are hurtling, moving towards this even more and more surveillance, even more and more extraction, even more and more militarism. And so we have got to create this sort of new vision for regeneration, which starts at the local level. So in Ukraine, what might that mean? Of course, we don't have the answers, okay? So I don't want you to think that we have answers that can be pulled out of a hat. I think this is very important for the future of Ukraine, is that each community, each city, each region is going to have to create a plan that isn't top down, that isn't aid driven, that isn't built on, okay, we're giving you millions of dollars and these are the mega projects you're going to have. It really needs to be built from the bottom up. And bottom up initiatives can be funded across the country. So we're looking at political fairness, economic inclusion, work opportunity, environmental restoration, legal justice, and social cohesion. How do these things come together to build a regenerative community where you are protecting, the things that are broken, repairing things that have been destroyed, investing in the future, and helping transform the community into something that thrives rather than something that's ailing. And part of that, what we mean by regenerative economy, is really local wealth building, building community value. So instead of a business being just sucking value out of the community, we feel that a regenerative business is one that when it lands in a community, it actually enriches the community and makes the entire community better. And this is what we're calling regenerative business. So now, if you remember, I just said, in business school, we don't teach how to create community value. So the real question is, how does a community create community value? And of course, these are the jobs to be done at basically community by community. And we came up with this community value pyramid, but each one of these pyramids can be created by your community. So you could say, in our community, we need, the basics to survive. We need essentials. We need to get through the winter. We need to find some way to heat our houses. We need electricity. So the basics, are of course essential. And unfortunately, war disrupts all of this, as you know. And you guys are, a lot of you in Ukraine don't even have electricity, and now you have winter to deal with. So we really do see that the tragedy, if you will, of not creating community value from the get-go, to actually have the hubris like Putin has, and let's say our leaders have, to think that their needs are more important and that the needs of the communities are subservient. This is an example where you have two types of growth. This is the common S-curve that we're taught in business school, but that S-curve usually ends in a crash or another S-curve. And what we're talking about is, let's find a way to prevent this crash in your economy and find a way to repair, invest, and transform to where we don't have endless growth, but really a plateau of stability. And this is sort of the future of a sustainable country, or a sustainable enterprise, or a sustainable economy. What is a regenerative organization? If you're a business or a nonprofit or a governmental organization, it has to do with both. You have to create organizational value, the prosperity, and community value together, and that includes the essentials. So we feel like this doesn't happen without participation from everyone on the ground. So you have to find this common ground between, and this is sort of the community-based approach that we've been using to bring people together, start creating sort of projects that work, but from the bottom up instead of from the top down. And of course, with participation, and you have to look at a community not as somebody who needs aid, but as somebody that needs empowerment and ways to uplift themselves in ways that make a difference. So there are many roads that lead to regeneration. And we don't know the answers, but we can say that we have been studying and creating, this is our next book that's coming out on regeneration. But we have several approaches to building community. And if you're interested in more there, we have, of course, the Wicked 7 site, as well as regenmarketing.org. And so now what we're going to ask, instead of asking you for questions, we're going to ask you for answers. And so this, of course, we'll try to answer questions as well. But what we're looking for is answers, not just questions. And with that, I'll stop the presentation. Phil, you got anything to say?
Okay. Yeah. Now we have you are proposing us to answer how to solve all 7 big problems. No. Only one.
No,
only
just
one.
Regenerating Ukraine. You know, what are the ways in which? Yes.
Okay, but so far we have said questions, and I'll start with question, and would appreciate if you would somehow try to address this issue, because there are several. For example, just to come to the basics, but you appeal to community level, to businesses, the community level, to start discussion. Let's say we started teaching in business school these purpose issues of value creation, and no longer considers actually value only based on profit characteristics, and it's a much broader view, also due to Professor Kotler's lots of publications in this respect. So we study on the community level, great. But what we are facing actually on the community level is simultaneously a global organization, global, very powerful companies. Do you really believe in how actually this process, in your opinion, would work? Starting changing certain values, common goods on the community level, then at the same time facing this very, very powerful might not necessarily think on the same community level, and somehow, yep, okay.
Yes, let me comment on that. Of course, most of the economic world and the business world was working on the theory of profitability being the major and the only thing that counted in a successful business. And of course, that was put forth by Milton Friedman, my former teacher at the University of Chicago, on the idea that if you want a measure of success, you have to have some unit. And the unit of profit is so clear when you run a business that they don't have to worry about other things. But as you suggested, there's a movement now to add some more ideas. What are the ideas? First of all, we have to start practicing sustainability. We want companies to make sure they're not engaged in waste. It's amazing how many things are just thrown in a pile and never seen again that could be material resources for redeveloping many things. So companies are, fortunately, in many places, trying to, we call that recover resources, reuse them, and get rid of the wastefulness of modern capitalism in many ways. Okay, the next thing that's happening is the companies themselves, and they need a view of where they're going and what they're about. And it turns out that most companies are thinking, again, still, number one is profitability. Now, here's the thing. Does that profit get shared? It's one thing to say that our purpose as a company is growth. It's growth. But you know, it's not just growth, it's good distribution of the growth that you want to take place. In other words, are the workers paid enough, earning enough to keep the economy going? Or are they just being given a rate that is the least that the company wants to give them so they can have more money going into wealth? And it turns out that one of our very basic concerns is inequality. That recently an article was written that if we don't make some changes in what we value in our stakeholders, by our stakeholders, I mean our employees, our suppliers, our distributors, if we don't share wealth with them, we're going to have growing inequality, bringing us back to the feudal days when there were a few wealthy people and everyone else was a serf. We're going back to serfdom unless we start figuring out things. Now, let me give you one set of possibilities. Better than a corporation is the idea of a company owned by the employees. And this is unfortunately too rare. In other words, whenever you have a company where the employees themselves have ownership, or at least they feel they have some ownership, they'll work so much better for the good of everyone. And maybe worker co-ops are the way to go, where you're not doing the extractive taking away from everyone else, but the workers co-ops, which we see abundantly in parts of Europe. We may need, in other words, companies to think more broadly about the people they're hoping to serve and not just extracting the wealth and not redistributing it. So I'll stop here, but I believe that we're getting some new ideas on what business is about and what it can be about.
I'd like to add to some of that, what Phil has been saying. You know, we have some questions here. I'm going to just read them out. Can business develop during war? And you can argue that war is one of the most profitable businesses for the people who supply weapons. In fact, that's one reason we have wars, is because, you know, at least in the West, there's a lot of money to be made during war. Unfortunately, it's much harder to create regenerative businesses that actually create value for people when you're being bombed, or your infrastructure is being destroyed, or your roads don't work, or you're being, you know, threatened with your life. So, of course, nothing happens without peace, right? In other words, the first step in any kind of societal renewal must be peace and removal of corruption. In fact, one of the biggest problems today in the world, when we map out these 7 wicked problems, at the root cause of all these problems is the idea that power and corruption doesn't allow for change, regardless of political system. So it doesn't matter if we have communism, democracy, socialism, theocracy, the same thugs end up ruling the system. It doesn't even matter what political system you have, because when they're corrupted, they're all run by the same kind of megalomaniac, authoritarian, you know, Julius Caesar model of, you know, guerrilla manager. And you can take this analogy and apply it to a company as well. And you see, does your CEO, what's the distance between the CEO and the employee? How far are they? And you could do the same thing and say, what's the distance between the leader of my country and the average citizen? How far apart are they?
We want zero distance between the boss of a company and his or her workers, and between the citizens of a country and the elected officials. And that's at the root of the changes that have to be made.
And the zero distance also comes into what's the distance that we have from nature, because our businesses are destroying nature as if it has no consequence on their future. And so, you know, the war in Ukraine is sort of captures in a nutshell all that is wrong and all that is right, and what is the hope of the future, that people can work together, come together to support what's right and to make a difference in a positive way.
Let me add to that. I've been very interested in what is called peacemaking and peace marketing. It came about in a visit where I was asked in the Middle East, Dr. Kotler, you've advised and consulted on a number of problems, but there's one you keep avoiding. And I said, what's that? He said, how to market peace. And I said, well, I'm not avoiding it. It's one of the most difficult things. But I will say this, that we have to identify the areas of war. We're almost forgetting about Syria still going on too, and many other places. And that it's actually that the fault, excuse me, I got to shut my phone. The problem is that the failure is the United Nations is the failure. Let me explain what I mean. The United Nations was set up to create a peaceful world and use peacemaking when needed. Unfortunately, they didn't develop an armed force, which would be supported by 180 nations. And we can't do much about that. But what's worse is they have a member called Russia, which is a charter member. The thing I want to see, it's the straightforward solution, that enough of the 180 members of the United Nations ask for a change, want to make a change. The majority of them say we want to make a change in the charter. We want to drop Russia from being a chartered member. And in fact, we want them to be out of the picture of the United Nations because they're misbehaving and setting a very bad example for the world. And in fact, we're going to set up hypothetical charges to them for all the destruction. And the more destructions they do, the more their bill will be to the rest of the world. And we make that point to the people in Russia who didn't want the war, that they're going to be all facing, for every bomb they drop, it's costing them, not only the Ukraine. So peacemaking could be helped considerably if we can figure out how to use our diplomats to talk to 180 countries, and can we get together and face Russia and dismiss them from the influence that they have?
We still have only questions coming to our chat and to question and answers block. So I would continue. Let me make a follow-up. We have a number of questions, but let me make some to the following. The world is divided. I started with community and global corporation, but the world is divided in every community as well. And as you, Mr. Sarkar, correctly mentioned, when using this chart of the reasons, it's related to ideology in the past, and there still are a lot of ideas which divide the world. And not only in economics. Currently, your teacher, Professor Kotler, Milton Friedman, is not very popular among economists as well. so it's not only economics, everywhere. The world is divided. How you believe, what is the possibility, let's say, to bring people together, to talk to them? Because, and then we have to another situation is about technology. It's recent, yesterday or the day before yesterday, was some manifestations in China. Who, except of Chinese authorities, could actually influence this with those setup which already exist in China? So how this communication could be done via internet, via tools, Facebook and other, through your website, because you propose to create certain ecosystem, but there will be other ecosystem, how to, let's say, destroy the borders between ideologies. Do you have any ideas?
Well, you know, about what happened in your country when the war was started on your country was a hope that I had that the biggest countries of the world would all back Ukraine. China, India, all of these big influential countries. And I was very disappointed that particularly India, who is a country, which is a country I know very well and they care a lot about, being neutral and supportive of good causes. And even though they have their own war problems with the Muslims and the Hindus and so on, but we needed to, both the US and its allies had to negotiate. They haven't done enough negotiation with those countries that should come out more publicly against what Russia is doing. I don't understand how they, all right, so why don't they come out publicly? Because they got business being done with Russia. And maybe it's ideological too, but I think we can make a lot of headway with every country we could announce that is against what Russia is doing now to the Ukraine. And on that front, it's not just that you may have the diplomats, but the diplomats, remember, there's so many allies who go with, who are supporting your cause, but they've got to do a much better job of doing that.
Can I say something here?
Yeah.
One of the problems that we have in the United States, which maybe the Ukrainians are not as aware of as we are, is that our politicians are basically at the mercy of fundraisers. The donors. And so what in other countries might be called bribing, in our country is called lobbying and is legal. So many of the Republicans or many of the politicians that we have are actually being funded by interests that are friendly to, let's say, Putin and Russia, or the oil and gas and the fossil fuel industry. And part of this, not just the politicians, but also the media. Our media is also controlled by those same interests. And when these interests serve to distract us from the truth, we end up with fake news. We end up with a population that isn't really educated on what's going on in the world. And this willful ignorance, or this taught ignorance that we teach our people to be ignorant by creating all this fake news. All we care about is Cristiano Ronaldo's salary when he moves to play for some Saudi Arabian team, or the celebrity stuff. We are doing a disservice to the future. And who are we robbing? Our children. Our children are going to suffer because of this. Our children are already, with climate change. You could even add that the war in Ukraine is a distraction from the actual disaster and extinction that is facing this planet, not just of a few animals or a few species, but really of all mankind. And instead of working on that major problem, what are we doing? We're picking on tiny, stupid, issues to divide us and kill each other instead of focusing on the real challenges facing humanity. And this has, of course, always been the problem with humanity. We have a hard time. In fact, the biggest danger to humanity is humanity, not nature, not anything else. It's us. And I think that's part of this movement. More and more kids are sick of this. They don't want to work for big corporations anymore. They want to work for companies that make a difference. They want to work for businesses that have a conscience. They want to vote for politicians that have a conscience. And still, the billionaires and the power centers of this world don't want that, right? They want to fund the status quo and worse. And I think that's where we see capitalism colliding head-on with democracy, that they don't actually coexist.
Well, let me add, however, this, that there are all types of capitalism. I think American capitalism is overdue for reconstruction. Then the question arises, what could we see as good capitalism? It's so obvious. And it's a whole Nordic system of Finland and Sweden and Denmark and Iceland and Norway. In other words, they have a sense of a country having the goal of everyone has a good life. And it's a set of programs they have to ensure that pay is good and a livable pay, and also that children are taken care of and that even parents are taken care of. Because I worry a lot about the generation that they're at the age where they're trying to support their kids to develop well and their parents are in need of help. We call it a sandwich problem. And I think that we need to get much more. Now, I think it goes back to business cooperation. I don't have a sense one way or the other of, do your business people meet regularly? And I know they're going to compete with each other, of course, but do they also have the ability to sit down and look at the questions that we're raising about what is the purpose of a business? And the purpose of business to me is to help make a better life for more people. And that's why American capitalism is not doing that. We still have hungry people, and we have too much wealth being accumulated. So we need to actually not get rid of capitalism, but to make it work better. And that means government officials who pass laws, and who were elected by the donors, don't want to move in that direction. Our income tax system in the United States, the top bracket is only 37%. And we let all of these billionaires pay no taxes. They have the best lawyers in the world to find loopholes. So we have our problems too, that are not at anything like your problems, of course. But maybe you should be aware of what it makes a good country and a good set of companies and a good set of government.
I'm not sure whether you read, but the Edelman Trust Barometer, which is published every year, actually puts to business business at the moment is the most trustable agency, if it not take into consideration NGOs, but among media and government, business has trust. So CEOs, people who are in charge of business, who lead businesses, are trustable. So people expect them to speak, we expect them to do. And let me ground it back to Ukraine. And one of the questions actually inspired me. We have currently economy which is not collapsing, but under the great stress. So it's down, now infrastructure is destroyed, all other things are happening on, and of course everybody thinks of rebuilding, of not rebuilding words, but to make the new economy, to make the new country, to make it a smart, wise, good, etc. What would you recommend to business people who are trustable in Ukraine as well, not to politicians who are corrupted as well everywhere in the world, and Americans are not very original? What would you recommend? Which kind of businesses, which kind of approaches, what kind of good common values to create, what to where and how to build it? Because it's a good possibility, actually. We have a big country in the center of Europe with inspiration to, after the war, of course, to start creating new value for the world. What would you recommend? Which kind of inspiration? What kind of
It's a good question. It's a good question, and I want to go back to what Christian said. of making the effort not top-down alone, although it pays to do some top-down work, but bottom-up, and so community development. So here's what I suggest. Each medium and large city, whatever, build up a list of two things. One is a list of the problems they're facing now in that community. It may be very different from another community, but let's have a consensus of what our biggest needs are, our priorities in that community, and then have those priorities looked at, and then what steps do we take now as a community? What do we want to accomplish in 1 year that we're not accomplishing now, or at least over 3 to 5 years? And what strategies are appropriate to help the people living in these communities as consumers and as workers, and how to support them. You know, you got to give much more support to your workers and to your consumers so that they can have hope that there is a vision. You need a vision for that each community that makes them not want to move from one community to another community, but to identify what can be improved in their community.
I'd like to make one remark, because one of the participants on today's seminar corrected me, and corrected absolutely great. And thank you, I appreciate and apologize. We should think of creating value not after the war, but now. Okay, so that was some kind of a wrong message from myself. Ms. Sarkar, would you add anything? Recommendations?
Yeah, I would. Possible, I'm going to share this screen, which I didn't have in our current presentation. But, you know, it's not about left versus right. It's really about the people, the few people who have everything and the majority who don't. So it's really a matter of recalibrating and regenerating our entire economic system, to be focused on a living economy that values life, not an economy that values destruction. So if you look at all these pieces and how they fit together, you'll see that this is sort of a whole new way to look at the economy. It's not socialism, because we still believe in entrepreneurship. We still believe in the power of creativity and people to earn money because they create beautiful things or they create useful things. But it cannot all be going into the hands of a handful of people. The entire financial system is rigged to sort of benefit a very few people. So, for example, the entire Silicon Valley model of investing in a venture capitalist way for a startup to turn it into a unicorn is actually a very destructive model. It would be far more important if they could create 1 million small companies that were doing well, rather than one big one that dominates and kills everybody else. So we must create a new formula for what we define success by. And it cannot be based on size. It cannot be based on wealth extraction. It cannot be based on the traditional measures we have today in business for maximizing value in the business world. We must have the cost to nature and the cost to the community and to humans. So, the way we're going, we'll have machine capitalism where basically my robot will talk to your robot, and my robot will exploit your robot. And pretty soon there won't be any humans, because humans don't really have no value compared to a robot. And I'm only being half sarcastic. What I'm really talking about is, already with global warming, we find that 1/3 to 1/5 of the world is going to suffer for nothing that was caused by them. That they're going to suffer because they won't be able to live in the countries that they were born in, because those countries are going to become unlivable. And so we've got to rethink what countries mean, what we mean, what do we really want for the future? Do we really want a future filled with war and destruction, and where we can't eat, where our temperatures are too high, and storms and natural disaster? Or do we create a different economy, an economy that actually works for people? And I think that's what this chart is trying to show, is that we need to create, we can't abandon globalization, but we can have cosmo-localization, where, you know, we can't abandon, let's say, consumerization, but we don't have to buy everything. We don't have to create fast fashion. We have to have different rules for industry that don't regulate themselves. Does that make sense?
Everything makes sense. I'd make a short remark, because Professor Kotler, I'm sure that when you mentioned that your father and mother are from Ukraine, Ukrainian were somehow very much pleased and excited, our participant as well. But when listening to a latest remark of Sarkar, I thought, look, Milton Friedman's wife, as far as I remember, was also from Ukraine. And Simon Kuznets graduated Kharkiv high institution, and then created for the USA GDP and all others, let's say, counts to calculate how economy is measured and what actually we are pursuing. So it seems like Ukrainians are responsible for all these troubles, and we need to create certain answers. And I address in our audience, let's work hard, because the world actually needs ideas how to substitute GDP and financial measures for values. I know that's not only Ukrainians are thinking about this, but that was a remark applying to our audience. I'd like shortly, because we still have a time shortage, to discuss a bit other message, about the technology, about the rules. On your side, and during today's sessions, you mentioned the movement, on your side, the movement of movements, something like ecosystems, also appear, stand up, are common languages which appeal to leadership. At the same time, we are using at the moment Zoom, and people are connected with these techniques. And on Facebook or whatever, there's a discussion how many bots are in Twitter, and avatars are coming with Meta, etc. So can the real physical movement, I mean moving people, can be substituted, in your opinion, and appear as a force in, let's say, this modern technological world, whereas we're moving only vacuum cleaners and also communicating with other things. I'm not a young person, and always interested in how this world will be moving. Moving by what? By avatars in the matter? How would you comment on this?
You know, the metaverse has been of great interest, and it really was not started by Zuckerman and Facebook, but earlier than that. And then he expanded on it, and he's a little sorry he's done that, because it's not working for what was a big drop in their business. But the metaverse is not helpful for us to all become avatars and buy and sell non-existent property that we pay for. It's almost like the coinage we're doing, these other currencies that have no justification, really. You're just tying up your money and in bitcoins, and now that's going down from 20%. $20,000 to $10,000 in terms of value. So I think we should watch these newer developments in finance and in the metaverse and so on. But it's not very helpful to our business people right now to start, for Ukrainian business people to start doing much with that. But here's the thing. When I wrote the book on chaotics, and I named it Chaos, And I raised a lot of questions that keep coming up. And I'm going to read just some of them if I can find the page in the index. But it's like, what do we do now? Do we reduce our marketing, our brand, our new product development expenses as a country in the Ukraine, as a business firm? Do we do more price discounting? I mean, I want to talk a little bit about business now. Should you just go deeper into the discounts you're giving to customers to get them to buy your brand? And should we cut back on training our people and developing their skills? Because there's so really all of that raises, what are the priorities right now in the turbulent world of Ukraine? To what is your strategy? What is the company's hope now to survive? First, hope is to survive and collect enough money to support the resources needed. And then secondly, to take a bigger picture of, is your strategy one just for today and just making enough to live on, or is it about having a strategic thing that inspires everyone in the company to want to work hard for that particular hope? I think business has, as you said earlier, they have to begin to, they're the big institution that is promising to us that if they work on these things, they're going to be guiding us. And so the question is, what meaning should a business put out there about what their company is all about? What is your narrative? What is giving hope about your situation, in spite of how bad it is? But give hope, package hope, but not false hope, but meaningful hope that is meeting the dream of a nation that wants to recover.
Yes.
I would like to add a little bit about digitalization and the process of building platforms. You know, in the US, we have rushed into building digital platforms that have been based on exclusion and really owned by the old capitalistic model of, a few owners and investors. That same platform, so let's say call it Amazon, call it Facebook, call it Apple, whatever the platform is, right now they extract 30% of your transaction fee on anything that you buy or sell. You're gonna give them 30%. What if that platform was built not as a private company, but as a public institution that was, let's say, tied into the post office? So for example, if Ukraine wanted to build a digital platform that connected the entire country and was built as a public value platform so that every entrepreneur could get on that platform and buy and sell goods, but then instead of paying 30% to Amazon or Alibaba or Zuckerberg, you end up paying, let's say, 5% to this public value or publicly owned platform. That kind of change in business models could be truly revolutionary to bring wealth down to the community level. And that's something that I feel like the Ukraine, as it shifts and rebuilds its economy, could do well to look at alternative models, alternative business models that are more regenerative than the extractive digital models that we see today, which are simply good old-fashioned brutal capitalism applied to the digital space. What if there was a more enlightened way to do this? Okay.
Well, that's a pity. I need to somehow wrap up this discussion, and let me do it with the words of our attendees. I would just read it. She is Olga Ditkovska, who wrote, "I have no questions. I want to express my admiration to Philip Kotler who wrote the wonderful textbooks that I studied in college 20 years ago. Thanks a lot, a great man. And Mr. Sarkar, I do hope that it's not the last time you're our guest. I mean, not in Reinforce UA, but in Ukraine as well. And you will hear the same words, let's say, in a couple dozen years after you will be able to solve at least one of the 7 weeks problem. We still have time, I believe. The world will not end in the next 10 years, hopefully, and we should use this time to work and to change. So thank you very much, and wish you all.
Thank you.
Thanks
so much.
And to all our participants, I'd like to remind you that Reinforce UA project is on full pace, and we shall meet next week twice. Actually, the first time on Wednesday, when we shall keep talking about marketing. Well, today was not about marketing, but Professor Kotler, we couldn't but think of marketing when seeing you on the screen. And our guest will be Nick Coates. He used to work for IBM in different roles, and will be speaking about how to use design, how to design the services in order to meet needs of the communities. So I remind you also that you could have donations on our website that would be used to support the women who are outside Ukraine at the moment and like to start their own businesses. And we all look forward for your joining. Despite all these troubles and missiles Putin sent us, we still work, still have lights. I'm speaking today from the studio of MIM Kyiv. We have accumulators additional, and we shall keep working and keep struggling and keep creating value, which is absolutely necessary for our future. Goodbye. See you at school.
The war in Ukraine has changed the world, and now we need to think about where this world is moving to, together. That's why MIM Business School is launching the nationwide educational project Reinforce UA, where the world's greatest minds will share their ideas and insights. And you will get their experience, change your perspective, and discover what changes should the business be ready for, before and after the victory. Every week on reinforceua.com.